I've focused most of the attention in this talk up to now on engaging an individual in risk and risk-taking discussions. And I have to admit there was an omission during the previous video presentation. I forgot to remind you of a further PDF resource that was attached to this module. It's entitled Engaging Trusting Working Relationships. And I'd like to remind you to read that document at this point. Do that now, if you haven't already found it, that is, because it sets out distinctions between supportive and therapeutic functions and the means of engaging those roles with individual people you're working with. So it'd just be useful if you could just check that one out. Now, having got that omission cleared up, I emphasize that engaging individuals is our primary concern, but in the interests of creative collaboration, challenging, positive risk-taking decisions will often require the involvement of more than two people who could, for example, be part of a specific team or part of a group of people from across teams, across agencies. So this presentation will focus on elements of team working. This quote really captures my meaning quite well. No one can whistle a symphony. It takes a whole orchestra to play it. I'll leave you to ponder that for a moment, what that means in terms of us working together as teams. And this idea of teams, working in teams, ideally, our notion of collective decision-making looks something like this. Everyone's contributing their specific expertise in some smoothly functioning whole. If only it was just like this. Having said that, in this quote, Tahir Shah offers a very positive and big vision of teamwork. With an enthusiastic team, you can achieve almost anything. However, certainly from my consultancy point of view, having done a lot of work involved in training and developing teams, in reality, it requires a lot of attention, a lot of work on teamwork in itself, on the focus and the function of teamwork itself, particularly when we think of the potential impositions and challenges that positive risk-taking decisions will put on teams. I'm sure I don't need to remind you at this stage that we are talking about the type of decisions that can often create tension and conflict from opposing views that may be held within the same team. I'm just kind of reflecting back on situations where, yep, there have been major rifts and difficulties in teams. People not easily coming to a similar perspective. Say, for example, on how to manage an escalating suicide risk. Some people prefer a more restrictive option, hospitalization perhaps, while others in the same team may be looking at the details from a completely different perspective, seeing more of the protective factors and possibly thinking about the safety net of contingency plans within a specific situation, but supporting somebody to be at home. And certainly in all of my work with crisis and home treatment teams, this is the kind of dilemma that comes up very frequently. So this concept of teamwork needs a lot of continuous work on it. Here's an image for you, because teamworking with good intentions, but lacking a focus, lacking leadership, lacking effective systems of communication and collaboration might just end up down the pan, a bit something looking like this. Having said that, let's take a more positive viewpoint of what contributes to team effectiveness. My late but great friend Steve Onyett produced an essential book for anyone interested in everything to do with teams and teamworking. In it, he quoted West by identifying 3 contributors to making teams effective in what they do: task effectiveness, mental health, and team viability. And you'll see there, task effectiveness, the extent to which the team is successful in achieving its task-related objectives. Mental health, the well-being, growth, development of team members, that all-important support and supervision. Team viability, the probability that the team will continue to work. Positive risk-taking will be a challenging benchmark for all three components, as I believe it is a task that needs clear consensus in teams, from simply agreeing about what the concept is, let alone putting it specifically into practice. It can be a challenge to the mental strength of individual practitioners, and as a result of the potential differences of opinion, and from that, the whole mental strength of a team. And repeated failed decisions will quickly mount up as a challenge to the viability of a team. This is the Steve Onyett book I'm referring to. Though it's based in mental health practice, I do recommend it as a great reference for anyone interested in the research and the analysis of all the functionings of teamwork. On the other hand, if you want something focused on the real creativity of one specific team, try my chapter, Funky Mental Health, which describes a decade of assertive outreach practice in an award-winning team, who I supported from their initial training through all of those years of practice development and review over what amounted to about a decade. I described this work in a chapter contributed to an edited textbook on assertive outreach in 2011, but I also gained permission to include that very chapter in my own textbook, Working with Strengths, in 2014. Meetings, anybody? Meetings have an important function to play as part of the effective systems that would be needed to get teamwork functioning well. Or do they? This quote from J.K. Galbraith provides a note of caution before we plunge into a lazy call just to have meetings. Our first consideration should be not to have meetings just for meetings' sake, because, as Galbraith says here, meetings are indispensable when you don't want to do anything. Yes, I can remember those times when people really don't want to achieve anything. I've certainly sat in on many meetings where the idea of democracy kicks in, so that we can all be chipping in our own two penneth, with the result that nobody's really taking the decision. We all hope someone else will take up the baton of responsibility. So good meetings really do require skilled chairing, a clear purpose in the agenda, and to encourage an inclusive culture. They need to be time-focused so that we can, as a result of that, produce some or achieve some timely decisions. Good sharing is vitally important, as this image will perhaps remind us in its own ironic way. If I say skilled sharing is essential for bringing people together effectively, the tone of the chairperson can set the whole atmosphere, the culture, whether we're really working collaboratively and creatively or not, whether we're working with people or not. This woman in the image is not giving me that strong impression that she's really bringing people together, that she's in a position to bring a group together to make any of those really challenging risk-taking decisions. Though, sadly, this perhaps does represent the feelings and experiences of many who have had to suffer the interminable meetings brought together for no clear purpose. Sometimes there was a clear purpose in the dim and distant past, but nobody quite remembers what it was, or why the whole function has veered so badly off course. There will be a whole lot of information in the literature about how not to conduct meetings. And you can ask many service users, clients, patients, what their experience of professionals' meetings has been like. But as a professional, don't hold your breath waiting for any superlatives to be dispensed in your direction. You're just as likely going to get a different picture from the one of effectiveness that I was suggesting earlier. But as with all aspects of what we do, we can still learn a lot from how not to do meetings. The opposite of what you see in terms of the messages on this slide may actually act as a good starting point in how we then should be trying to work with people. Also, keep in mind that many of the staff members themselves would choose not to attend many of the meetings that they actually have to attend. And that says rather a lot for how well or how not so well we're addressing the practicalities of teamwork and getting people together, getting people working together. So here on this slide, here's a reflection that I'll outline to you based on discussions with a lot of service users and in some of the literature. So the number of times people as a patient, service user, client, and indeed their carers have been invited into a situation where they're greeted with quite a hostile, intimidating sense of formality. People sat around, professionals with all of their papers at the ready. Reality is that as professionals, they've already held their own pre-meeting before this meeting, before they've even invited you in. Then, to make you feel even less involved, they'll use their professional jargon, supposedly person-centered, relationship-centered. But you're pretty much excluded. If you can't buy into and understand and use the jargon proficiently, yeah, you're excluded. You're certainly left knowing your place in the hierarchy. The whole idea, though, is that it's supposed to be all about you. Though you may well feel, or you will feel, I'm sure, and indeed your loved ones, your carers will feel, like you're very clearly the bottom of this hierarchy. And on occasions, with the fidgeting and the shuffling of papers, you might be left feeling that you're surrounded by busy people who've got places to go. Some of them are clock watching, needing to be somewhere else. But they might just tick that person-centered box by getting you to sign some piece of paper. That's pretty much the plan that's emerged out of this discussion. That, my friends, is how not to hold meetings. But sadly, that has all too frequently been the experience for people attending meetings about themselves. Thinking about positive risk taking, the very focus of this entire course, when it comes to taking the risk, I just want to remind you that we're faced with very challenging decisions. It's perfectly reasonable and human to be fearful of blame, a blame culture. But I will say that collaboration will usually achieve more confident decisions. The individual, particularly if there is an experience or a perception of a blame culture, might well revert to more risk-averse decisions, defensive decisions, for the wrong reasons. A shared decision can then lead usually to more confident action. And I'll suggest to you that in terms of working with people, a cohesive group is more difficult to undermine than the individual acting alone. That's another reflection on how we might stand up to the blame culture. Collective, defensible decision making. My final thought here, which I will leave for you to ponder, is would our meetings be more effective and efficient if they were conducted standing up? Yes, there is evidence that this is the approach taken by some businesses or business leaders, and it does concentrate the mind on the task more sharply. Teamworking and the use of meetings have been two areas outlined in this presentation, so I'd like you to reflect on each and how they're happening for you currently. Firstly, read the PDF document entitled Teamworking and Team Approach. Within the resources linked to this module, that's where you'll find it. Then give some thought to, there are 2 questions at the end of that document. Just ask you to reflect on the questions you find there. Secondly, read the PDF document entitled The Pros and Cons of Meeting Etiquette, and think how your current meetings match either of the options that I set out in that particular document.